you've got this great combination of impoliteness that makes you be a comedian and guilt. That's lovely. So you say insulting and reprehensible things, and then you feel bad about it.
Yes, exactly. All right, glad to have our next guest. There have only been 3 people I think we've done extended interviews with since Going Daily.
3 or 4. Mark Duplass. You didn't think of Mark Duplass.
Oh, that's right. Mark
earlier.
Duplass, because it was a long conversation from the leftist perspective. But as far as people, just because of how intelligent and interesting they are, it's been Dr. Peterson, Jordan Peterson, Dennis Prager, and Patrick Moore, co-founder of Greenpeace. By the way, atmospheric scientist who doesn't know anything compared to the YouTubers with Final Cut Pro.
That's true.
Little did I know. This is the first one who's come back for a second time. Hopefully they all come back. But you can go take his program. Highly recommend it at selfauthoring.com. You know him. He's everywhere now. Hopefully he doesn't get the Amy Schumer syndrome where he's overexposed and then people are like, I hate that Dr. Jordan Peterson. Dr. Jordan Peterson, thank you for being with us, sir.
Hello. Good to see you again.
Well,
you still leading the basket of deplorables?
I'm not. I don't know that I'm ever leading them. I don't even know that I'm in the basket. I think I just will take this assessment. I'm the basket case, and so it's probably more of a liability.
That's good. You're the basket case in the basket of deplorables.
Yes, I'm the basket case.
That's why you're a comedian.
There we go. Let's see, it's a little
All
turn of a
those jokes.
phrase. All those, they're fantastic. And after this, I'm going to go swallow a knife. So, Dr. Jordan Peterson, do you ever worry about like this overexposure? Because you're everywhere now. The good thing is everyone seems to be loving you, but there's so much content out there.
I worry about everything.
Okay.
I've been in a constant state of like exceptional anxiety since September 27th when all of this started happening. Yes, I worry about overexposure. I worry about overexposure. I worry about keeping up with my obligations. Answering my email, which I just can't do, and I feel terrible about that because there's all these people writing me unbelievably heartfelt letters. Like,
right.
You know, they're like the best letters I've ever read, and I get 12 of them a day or 15 of them a day, and I just can't keep up, and so I worry about that, and I worry that I'm going to say something unforgivably stupid instead of just normally stupid. I worry about what the hell I'm doing and what my role is on YouTube and yeah.
Well, that's very earnest, and I appreciate. He's like the YouTube Oscar Schindler. This 12 more YouTube comments. I could have done so much more. But you know what? I feel that way too. Listen, a lot of people when they go out there and they say, I don't worry. I think fear and intelligence are pretty close on that spectrum actually for a lot of people. You need to transform fear into something productive, but nobody I know who's hyperly intelligent or successful was I never worry about it. I let nature take its course. They control the things they can't and eventually learn to accept the things that they can't. Is that hard for you as an intellectual to accept things sometimes that are out of your control? I know you're into philosophy, so it's probably something you're hyperly aware of, but as someone who's very smart, a lot of the time, people who are very intelligent, they have a tough time accepting that they can't control some aspects.
Well, I guess the answer to that is that at the moment I'm striving to extend my control over all of these things that have manifested themselves. And so, for example, I just differentiated my email into 6 email addresses because that way I can maybe have a hope of keeping track of them. And I also spent, I suppose this is funny for those of your viewers who know something about me, I spent a substantial part of the last month cleaning up my room and my house because we had renovated it and then all of this happened. And so my room has been an absolute chaotic nightmare for about 8 months. And I've been so overwhelmed, I would say, with chaos and opportunity that I haven't been able to attend to it. So
now, is it this room that we're looking at?
It is this room, and it's very clean at the moment because I've moved everything that was messy into a different room.
Well, what is a professor's room, and does your wife send you to it?
Well, do you want to see it?
Yes, let's see Jordan Peterson's room. I don't know if anyone else has ever actually done a tour of your room.
Okay, I'm going to switch cameras for a second here.
Let's see Dr. Peterson's room.
I'll use this camera. Yeah, okay, so all right, so yeah, I'm going to turn the light on first.
Okay, but I was going to say, it looks a little bit like a horror film right now where something would come up from behind you and we would have no idea.
Okay, so
some art there.
So
is that a sleeve of a wizard? That's what that looks like when it's up. Okay, all right, your sleeve is in the way there, Dr. Peterson.
Okay, well, I'm just grabbing the camera here. So let's see.
Oh,
hang on a sec. I got to make this big so I can see what I'm pointing you at.
Okay.
All right, so this. Okay, so there you can see that.
I can't exactly see. Is it the Hardy Boys? No, there are some women there.
Okay, so this is a painting from the former Soviet Union.
Oh, wow.
And it's a group of Russian revolutionary youth who are about to be executed by this gentleman here on the edge of a cliff.
That's a horrible thing to put on your wall, Dr. Peterson. Why would
it is.
On a red wall, no less.
They executed for playing a fidget spinner? Is that right? That was a thing.
Yeah, this seems like a room that's designed to invoke aggression.
And then this is, well, maybe it is. You never know. And that's an Orthodox crucifix.
Yeah. Very nice artistry.
And then this is another Soviet painting. And that's a hero of the Soviet Union at work in a factory.
Now, why so much Soviet art?
I have about 200 paintings. Why?
Yeah, why so much Soviet art?
Let's see what else can I show you. Okay, so let's look over here. You see that painting there?
Yeah, that looks ominous. Someone die in it?
That is Yuri, the first man in space. What the hell's his name? Yuri. Oh, I can't remember.
Talking about the Sputnik?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a really cool oil painting because
beautiful.
It has a rocket in the background and a big radar array, and you don't get oil paintings of rockets and radar arrays very often.
Right. That is remarkable.
And then that painting, that's from the Spanish Civil War.
I thought that was Trump and
I just thought that was a Venezuelan yesterday.
Oh,
in a food line, and Bernie telling him he's fine.
And so my whole house is covered with paintings. I mean, literally every single wall, virtually every inch of every wall is covered with paintings.
Okay, let's bring it back home. Yeah, that looks like you killed somebody.
So, yeah, that's barnwood from my father's barn.
It looks like, Dr. Peterson, it looks like someone was scratching trying to get out. So this is, well, let's bring it home. Let's go back to where you're sitting. Let's continue
because... like Tom Waits' song, Murder in the Red Barn.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is giving me a whole new outlook.
This is the floor.
Yeah.
You see, it's got all these different colors because we bought hardwood from all sorts of different sources and had it put on. You know what I'd like to do at some point, if you're interested, is I could take you on a tour of the house because my third floor is a Kwakwaka'wakw Indian longhouse.
You are a sitcom character. You're like Mr. Feeney, the interesting professor who lives next door. And like, well, actually, the Aquaquac comes from the Algonquin tribe, which means forgiveness. Anyway, that is very, very interesting. If you could tilt your camera back down a little bit, we messed everything up.
I will.
But
that's a good idea.
There we go. World exclusive. Jordan Peterson shows us his room.
Yes, and so I could tell you a little bit about the room, let's say, because I have talked to people about cleaning up the room, and so, I think there's two things that are worth considering, and one is that it's a really good exercise to try to take a room, maybe your room or a room in your house, and try to make it perfect.
You know what? I am doing that.
And
let me tell you something. This may sound very silly. People make fun of me, and Not Gay Jared knows this. And I just ordered another one. I set up a nice painting in my office. Well, it's a picture turned into a painting. The one piece that I have in my room when we moved is the futon in my office, where my dog and I always used to watch TV in our old house. And that was the only piece of furniture that we carried to the new house. And actually, sound guy Edward had to reinforce it because it was broken down. So I have a desk, I have a leather chair, and I have a hammock in my office. And I keep trying to perfect that hammock because I had a relatively cheap one, a Mayan hammock that I got off Amazon. Then I got a much more expensive one that was hand woven with a very tight weave. The problem is, it's as a tall guy, it's a little too wide. This is kind of a math thing, the way I sit on the axis. So now I ordered a Brazilian hammock, and a big part of it is because I conditioned myself in that office that it's either a place of creativity or the kind of business that I enjoy doing, not the task work that I hate. And the only time I ever get in that hammock and it starts to rock is when I know I'm taking a 20-minute midday nap. I try to condition myself to be in that room, to create an environment for the certain brainwave patterns that I'm trying to achieve. And I've also read some studies that say actually hammocks, particularly for people with attention disorders, can be very beneficial for creating and memory formation.
When you lay in, it feels almost like a sensory deprivation sort of.
A little
trick.
bit, it does, because these Mayan hammocks are just there's miles and miles of thread in there, so
it's like you're floating.
It can hold up to like 1,500 pounds, but there are no pressure points. So it's almost like being in a floating tank if the room temperature is right. So I have been trying to perfect it, get that perfect hammock, hang it from the right angle, and we're replacing the flooring. So I think I understand what you're talking about, because that's a place where I spend a lot of time.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you do. And, well, the fact that you're paying such careful attention to it is also relevant, because what that also means is that you're training your capacity to pay attention.
Right.
And so a room is actually a very complex environment. There's a lot more possibility in a room than you would ever think. There might be an indefinite amount of possibility. And imagine if you're trying to organize your room, to set up your room perfectly, let's say that. So I'm going to make a couple of lateral associations there. So the first thing is that
one quick thing for people who are watching, we are going to do the self-assessment test on air with Dr. Jordan Peterson. For people who are wondering, they were asking for that. I just want you to know it's not out now. It's still in beta. He's tweaking it, but we are going to do this live on air, the personality test. Sorry, just because I know a lot of people were asking, and we'll be getting some messages.
No problem.
Now I want you to. Yes, I want you to continue now.
Okay, well, so you've got this room, and it's a place that you can operate, so it's actually a little bit of the cosmos that's under your control.
Right.
And so and you might think, well, it's only a room, so who cares? But that's the wrong attitude, because God only knows what you can do in your room. Or maybe God only knows what you will do in your room.
Yes.
Maybe only God
I don't like
should
to think of nightmares I have about not K. Jared in his room.
Yeah, but so first of all, in order to set your room up properly, you have to know what you're going to do in there.
Yeah.
And that means that you have to know what you're going to do. And that means you have to know what you should do. And so part of setting up your room is figuring out what you should do. And so that's hard, because your room should serve your purposes. Mm-hmm. And unless you have purposes, then you don't know what purpose the room should serve, and you can't set it up. And then, so the room should invite you to be the way you want to be when you're in the room. So if you envision yourself the way you would like yourself to be, then you should build the room so it's the stage where that drama can take place. And then if you try to make the room beautiful, then that'll also improve your taste, right? Because maybe you have to buy a painting, and so you have to learn something about art, and you have to paint it, and then you have to learn something about color, and you have to learn something about harmony and form. And then, you said, well, you're learning something about how to regulate yourself physically and psychologically, and you're setting up the room so that that's going to be an easy, something that you can do without undue complexity every day.
Right.
Well, that could be phenomenally useful, because let's say that adjusts the way that you act half an hour every day, just for example. Okay, so that's about 3 hours a week, and that's about 150 hours a year. And so that's about 3 weeks worth of work weeks per year that you've changed in your life just by attending to the hammock, say. And you want to get that exactly right, because you actually need some rest and you need to be creative. And so this idea of getting your room sorted out, which people are, they're having a lot of fun with and laughing about a lot. It's really, and so I'll give you a little Christian interpretation about that too. So it says in the New Testament that the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. And of course, a mustard seed is very, very small.
Very small.
It will build itself, given the proper circumstances, into quite a magnificent and complex, fully developed plant, almost a tree. And so when you make your room perfect, then that's a mustard seed that's equivalent to heaven. That's what you're doing, is that's what you're doing, is you're building a little microcosm of the kingdom of God on earth. And that will have, if you do it correctly, that will have power.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because we were talking about this, my wife and I, we do counseling here and there, and I think all couples should. And there's this joke that we've talked about on air, and even with my wife, I call them those frickin' Liberace nightstands, which, by the way, we've changed. We just changed them this weekend.
Did you?
So when we were still across the country before we moved. My wife moved here to set it up, and my wife is an unbelievable, she works in design, knows it through and through. She said, I really would love, I said, yeah, you can be in charge of it. The only thing I ask is that don't do anything ultra modern. We sort of do classic contemporary. That's how we decorate most things.
Yeah.
And her father is a furniture designer, and some of it is ultra modern.
Oh.
You know, kind of sitting on a chair, you know, like Woody Allen from Sleeper type thing. I said none of that. It has to be comfortable. So I said, you know, no metallics, nothing like that. She said okay, but she pushed with one thing, and I hate them. We call them the Liberace nightstands. They were bright silver nightstands, and I couldn't, and I joke about it because it's the one thing that really did frustrate me. I was like, listen, this is the tree of good and evil. Just don't eat from that one. And just like good old Eve, she took a big bite out of it, and I came in, and see, the problem is because of the way my brain works, and we'll do this in the assessment program, the house is beautiful. Beautiful. And Jared, you're going to have your hand on the censor button. So the house is beautiful. I'm looking around, everything is fantastic. I walk into the bedroom and just, without the impulse, go, the fuck is with the Liberace nightstand? And that really is it turns into an argument. It turns into an argument about my visceral reaction, not about the one request not being honored. And that was a big point of actually learning how men and women communicate differently. And to me, I've always been that way. The bedroom is very important to me. There's no reading in the bedroom. A bed is for two things. So there's no television in the bedroom. I make sure that if we get in bed, nothing else is occurring other than sleep, or you can take a guess. And my wife always used to read in bed, and it has a Kindle, and that's an electronic device. So there's been a constant give and take, but I've always been that way.
Well, so that's another really interesting example is that, see, part of the reason that marriages fail is because people don't set up their households together.
Right.
And so what you're describing is actually the process of setting up the household, which is coming to a negotiated agreement about how each room is going to be configured so that what should happen is what's going to happen there. But in order to come to that agreement, you have to come to a joint decision about what your priorities are and what is going to happen there and how important it is.
Right.
And that means there's going to be all these battles. And so when you set up your bedroom with your wife, like what you're doing, at least in part, is setting up your sleeping and your sex life. Like, it's a big deal unless you don't want to have a romantic and fulfilling sex life.
Right.
If you just want to be angry and you know, bite at each other constantly and freeze each other out of the bed. So the thing about
it's not what we're aiming for, but
right. Well, you know, it's amazing what people aim for. You know, it's true. It's really amazing, or what they don't aim for.
I think there's some marriages where you can see people are aiming to win. And that's just an exercise in futility. The argument's trying to repair it, if that's a mindset. And then I think there are marriages where people fight a lot, but they're fighting to try and better it, to try and communicate.
That's called thinking. That's called negotiating.
Yes.
And it's a difficult process because life is really hard. And people have different viewpoints. And sometimes a tremendous clash in the short term is necessary to bring about some medium to long-term harmony. Hey, I've got another little story for you that's relevant to this.
It doesn't involve a Russian painting where someone's executed, does it?
No,
Okay.
Yeah, I know, it's funny. I mean,
it wasn't the right way to send this off.
They don't know what to make. They don't know what to think when they come into my house because it's got, well, for example, it's got all this Soviet art in there because I'm interested in propaganda and in totalitarianism and
Bridge of Spies. That's what they think. If they don't tell you, Bridge of Spies. That's what everyone thinks.
Yeah, that's right. That's what they think. So, okay, so a friend of mine who came from this little town way the hell up in northern Alberta called Bear Canyon.
Okay.
He went to Sweden to get married, and when in the ceremony, his wife and he held a candle above both of them. Mm-hmm. Right, so they both had their hand on the candlestick, but it was up above them.
Yeah.
And it was a Christian marriage ceremony, although they weren't. I wouldn't say they were devout Christians by any stretch of the imagination. They're good people and all that, but they're not church attenders. So
right.
This was something sort of that happened because they decided to go to Sweden. But the candle represented Christ. Now here's the backstory. It's so cool. So the first of all is a candle is a light, right? And so it signifies illumination, and it signifies the light that burns in the darkness, and the candle that shouldn't be hid under a bushel. And it signifies the sun returning to the earth at the end of the winter and the dawn, all of that.
Right.
It's enlightenment and illumination. And it signifies Christ, who's the light of the world. Now, and so what it means for the married couple to hold that light above them is that they both agree not to be subordinate to each other or superordinate to each other. So the man doesn't dominate the woman and the woman doesn't dominate the man. They're both dominated by their union, their sacred union. And the sacred union is expressed by the candle, and that's associated mythologically with Christ. And so then the idea is that when you're having a discussion, the winner should be the thing that unifies you and brings peace.
Right.
Right. And so you see in couples, when they actually talk, it can be very contentious because people have temperamental differences and there are gender differences and life is complex. And so there are lots of battles that have to be had about things like nightstands. Right. And it sounds trivial, but it's not trivial.
Right.
Because it's part of getting it right. And what I see happening with marriages that fail is that people don't engage in those battles. And then their entire house becomes littered with wars that have not occurred.
Right.
Until the entire house is a war. And then they get divorced.
That's a great point. You know, actually, a comedian who's on the show all the time, Owen Benjamin, it used to be considered a hack premise, the difference between men and women. He's become much more conservative. He's brilliant. And he has some hilarious bits. I was actually just showing to my wife, because we got into a pretty big argument recently, and it was about the difference in communication between men and women. And it was hilarious. He actually does it in a way that's insightful, not just like, men don't know anything and women are smart. You know, he really does dive into the communication factor and the ideas of monogamy and where the challenges are. And it can be done sometimes through comedy and satire. A lot of people don't realize sometimes that someone like Owen, when he's addressing the fundamental difference between men and women, this guy has had some struggles, you know, with women in his marriage. I mean, he's a highly creative, he's a virtuoso on the piano, world headlining comedian, and you would never know what to talk to him. Just so humble, and he has that kind of California way of talking where he'll just sit there and he'll be like, you know, Caitlyn Jenner won Woman of the Year, but she wasn't even woman for a year. And it's just reduced to such a brilliant, you know what I mean? People don't understand. They think that person is dumb. That person is not. That is someone who is brilliant, who probably thought through his mental Rolodex of a million different ways of distilling an idea.
Right. Well, one of the things that's really interesting about YouTube right now, and I don't know how to understand it exactly, is that so many of the relatively astute commentators, the political commentators, are comedians. And the best discussions I've had probably on the net have basically been with comedians. So Joe Rogan is in that category, obviously, and Dave Rubin and you. And it's like,
thank you.
Comedian, you know, mythologically speaking, a comedian is a trickster or a jester, right?
Yeah.
And there's some funny things about jesters, because jesters are the only people in the king's court that are allowed to tell the truth.
Yes.
And it's because they're beneath the king's contempt.
Right.
Right? And so they can say whatever they want. And so one of the conclusions that Carl Jung drew from that is that the jester, the trickster, was the precursor to the savior.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because the comedian can tell the truth. And it's so interesting listening to good comedians in front of an audience, because mostly what they do is say things that everyone else thinks but won't dare say.
Well, two things there. I very much appreciate the compliment, and it's funny that you say that, because if you look at the comments section, I think in our last one, people are going, I wish you didn't tell any jokes. You can see Dr. Peterson doesn't like it. He wants to be serious. And I'm like, you don't understand. If you watch Dr. Peterson's talks, there's satire and there's sarcasm. It's just maybe people are missing it. But I know that
I was also so bloody terrified there for about 6 months that my sense of humor and play just about disappeared. And it was actually really helpful. You know, I got to say, just so you know, when I came down to see you the first time, that was about the first time in a couple of months that I actually got a chance to laugh and to play a little bit, and it was really a relief. And I mean, I spent when I had my kids, when my kids were little, and I still do this with my son and my daughters, we joke around and play all the time.
Yeah.
You know, it's really important, but I was so terrified out of my bloody skull for like 6 months that all of that was very, very hard to bring up to the surface. And so, anyways,
I'm glad we could help. And we gave you some good old American bourbon. I remember I said, you want bourbon or rye? He said, I'm Canadian. I have more rye than I know what to do with. Give me some bourbon. And we made a Manhattan, a makeshift on the rock. So I'm glad. Thank you very much. Because we very much, go ahead.
No, I was going to say a quick point about that makes me think about political correctness taking over comedy. At what point do you have to say comedians aren't doing what comedians are supposed to do?
That's the two things I wanted to say, because I wanted to thank him, but I did want to get to, we just had a conversation over at YouTube where they brought us in and talked about legality. It was just a room full of conservatives, of course. I never feel more alone than when I'm around think tank conservatives, because you know, we expect liberals to hate us, but you could just see the eyes at us. You know, we walked in with this not gay Jared shirt and an undocumented fight, and they're looking like, why aren't you taking this seriously? I don't think people understand. We were taking it very seriously, and YouTube was going through this generic thing about copyright, but they didn't address that everyone was there because we had been throttled, we had been censored, we had been targeted. And Not Gay Jared knows, we have it all recorded. I was the first one to say, hey, what about, and they were talking about parody, where SNL did a parody of Girls. So they were talking about why is it allowed, why is this, and the first thing they said is, now why do you think SNL can do this? And they said, well, they're SNL, so they have all the lawyers, first budget. They said, and of course, it's also very flattering of the show Girls, so they're not going to have a problem with it. And I raised my hand, and I said, yeah, but what, and Jared was right there. I said, what about when we're using comedy for its actual intended purpose? And they said, what? I said, what about when we're being the court jester making fun of the king? So what about that? What if we want to make fun of Girls? What if we want to make fun of Samantha Bee? Is all of a sudden
our parody is not flattering?
Yeah, what if our parody is not flattering?
Right,
we're currently undergoing a lawsuit potentially, and we can't talk about exactly what it is, but I will take it to the Supreme Court if necessary, because it's someone who's not happy with a parody that they find unflattering. And you could hear a pin drop. They said, well, that's a very good question, and I can't answer that. And this was the copyright lawyer. So that was one thing, and then I wanted that to lead into, Owen Benjamin talked about this. And I don't do nearly as much stand-up because I don't want to be shot live anymore. We do when there's heavy security, and this show takes a lot of my time.
You could die comically. That would be quite.
It would. I could mime it. Go out and.
Yeah.
But I think, like Owen Benjamin talked about this, he used to kind of be a liberal. He would make fun of, when it was the Leave It to Beaver sort of archetype, and anyone who didn't fit was, a misfit, and he was bullied, and I was bullied as a kid, and so you'd make fun of that. And I think now the left, if you look at Jimmy Kimmel's left, Samantha Bee is left, Conan O'Brien is left, Jimmy Fallon is left, Seth Meyers is left, Trevor Noah is left. You look at any show, you look at any film, you look at any news entity outside of Fox News, they're left. I think the reason you probably have good conversations is we're using comedy to try and punch back at bullies. Whereas the left's comedy, I don't think you'd have the same conversation, because Trevor Noah just said on The View, he doesn't think we should be able to say certain things in comedy that he said 4 years ago because they're offensive. So I do think it's not just comedians, but comedians who see those in power and who feel compelled to use whatever tools they have to fight it.
Yeah, well, those would be the real comedians.
Right.
So, here's something that's interesting in relationship to that. And I've been trying to puzzle this through because, I've been identified to some degree with the alt-right, which I think is it isn't precisely what would I say about that. I think that's a facile characterization. That's what I would say about that. Yeah. But one of the things that's really interesting that I have learned about the so-called alt-right is that, first of all, it isn't obvious how much of it is real.
Right.
And the second issue is that it's not obvious how much of it. It's obvious that a tremendous amount of it is an elaborate, ironic, satirical put-on.
Yeah.
And I really got a kick out of Kekistan, for example, for that reason, because it's this weird, elaborate joke that a very large number of people are participating in simultaneously. And it's a joke that keeps itself hidden. And because people are, they're afraid of this Kekistani idea, and they're afraid that it's an alt-right movement. And it's almost entirely an elaborate comic charade.
Yeah.
And part of what seems to be happening on the alt-right end of things, which I really think is a good thing, is that there's this use of satire as a what would you say? It's not as a weapon. That's not the right attitude.
It kind of is a weapon. I think Phyllis Diller, one of my favorite quotes, said, comedy is a rubber-tipped sword. It's a way to make a point without drawing blood.
Yes, that's very good. That's very good. And, we obviously don't want the counter response to political correctness to degenerate into the far right, the sort of far right that everyone is terrified about. Obviously, right. That would be a bad thing. And I don't think that that's a necessary degeneration at all. I think that the counter movement to the politically correct should be leavened with humor and satire as much as possible, because that keeps it healthy. Right. It stops it from degenerating into steel swords. And part of the problem with forbidding people from using a rubber-tipped sword is that then they'll turn to steel swords.
Right. That's a very good point. And I think the problem that you have with the alt-right is you have people who want to satire and they've never really done it, so they don't know where the line is. They're not really good at using it as a tool. It's giving someone a hammer who's never used a hammer before.
Right, of course.
And there haven't been many comedians on the right. It's kind of been more of a transition, like an Owen Benjamin and Nick DiPaolo. We've sort of helped bring them out of the closet because this program is the only, we're not competing with YouTube bloggers. We're kind of in the middle of the road where we're approaching kind of late night sort of status and numbers, and they have their sights on us, but with a skeleton crew. And so it's been sort of a bat signal for people out there, and they've come out. So it's very different when you see an Owen Benjamin or Nick DePaul. They know where the line is. Someone with a meme might not.
And I think it's
right. Well, definitely.
Yeah, I think as much as you see people being drawn into the conservative kind of fold, you see probably even more people their starting point is just being so turned off by the overreach on the other side. People like Owen and the comedians out there, it's like, don't think I'm part of this, actually. I don't think this is me.
I don't identify with it anymore. Yeah. So you don't want to, go ahead.
When we did some research into political correctness, and what we found was quite interesting. So we gathered about 400 statements that would be popularly associated with the idea of political correctness, like attitudes, right?
Right.
And then we gave we gave all 400 to a very large number of people, and we did this statistical procedure called a factor analysis, which tells you how the questions clump together. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we were trying to figure out, well, do all these different diverse attitudes actually cohere into something that you could reasonably describe as political correctness? And the statistics can tell you that. And we found that there were actually two dimensions of political correctness. One we called PC egalitarians, and they were basically liberals who were high in trait agreeableness. And so they're basically compassionate people who are high in openness. That makes them creative, relatively low in conscientiousness, and that sort of takes them out of the conservative realm, as does the low in openness. But the agreeableness means they're fundamentally oriented by compassion and egalitarianism. Okay, and so you might think about those as the good left-wingers. But then there was another clump of questions that we called PC, that indicated an attitude that we called PC authoritarianism. And those people were also agreeable, which doesn't mean they're not capable of violence, by the way, because a mother grizzly is perfectly capable of violence defending her cubs.
Right.
But they were much more inclined to censor and control.
Yeah.
And the overlap between those two domains of belief was only 12%. And so what we documented was a real implicit split in the left between, I would say, the classic left-wingers who are more concerned with social harmony and maybe, what would you say, cutting the working class a decent share of the pie.
Right.
And then this PC totalitarian type, which is really amped up with regards to social control and language control and censorship and all of those things.
Can you send that to me? Because, it's funny. I wrote a book proposal, and we've talked about this. I've only ever wanted to write 2 books in my life. And this was back when Green Day was big. It was called American Idiots, and it was satire because their American idiot was Bush and conservatives. Oh. And back then, this was before the term social justice warrior existed. This was before the term regressive. And I divided liberals as 2. I called them the American idiots, meaning people who go along because it's the default position to take. You go to school, anything you watch, listen to, or read in the entertainment industry or the news industry is going to tell you to be liberal, and they want to help people. They're do-gooders, and so they're liberal by default. And then I classed, because there was no term back then, I called them the propellers, the drivers of the system, the James Camerons, the Sean Penns. At that point, I think I mentioned the Clintons and the Al Gores, people who might know better, but they want to make sure that everybody else follows their point of view, and they will deliberately attack people who don't. These are the people who put everyone into this default liberal position.
The people who know the wage gap is a bunch of crap, but pushing
Barack Obama has Google. He knows the wage gap is a crock. And I wrote, this was the premise of my book. And it was more of a comedic book. And conservative publishers said, we're not really doing comedy. We're doing like Obama doomsday books. So read the Obama blueprint. Anything like that we'll buy. But this just seems too generalized. And here we are. I've always believed that you need to know the 2 types of leftists. Those are the 2 main types. And with one of them, you can convince them, the Dave Rubins, and the people who you can't, the people who are authoritarian, the Cenk Uyghurs who, signed Rubins checks for a while, you have to make an example of them to convince the other type. That's always been my theory.
Well, there was also indication in our research that the more centrist types serve as apologists for the more authoritarian types. And that's because the authoritarian type, one of the things that predicted the authoritarian type was relatively lower verbal intelligence, although the egalitarian types had higher intelligence. And so because they're not able to distinguish one from the other, because of the overlap in compassion, let's say,
Wow.
The more intelligent ones end up apologizing for the real the mad ideologues, let's say.
Wow.
Because, you know, on the left, look, there's a couple of things that are worth considering with regards to the general leftist perspective. And one of them is that inequality is the way of the world, and it can get out of hand and cause tremendous social disruption. So one of the problems that societies have to wrestle with constantly is the proclivity of produced goods to be held in the hands of a minority of people.
Right.
And that doesn't matter what the, like, I mean, it doesn't matter what the domain of productivity is. It could be money, and that's the one that people concentrate on with the 1%. But, you know, if you look at YouTube viewers, it's like 1% of the YouTube channels have 50% of the viewers. It's
Right.
the same thing.
Right.
And it's 1% of the recording artists sell 50% of the records, and so forth, you know?
Sure.
So you get this tremendous concentration of productive power and productive content in the hands of small numbers of people. It's like a natural law.
It is.
It's the Matthew principle, and that is, to those who have everything, more will be given, and from those who have nothing, everything will be taken away. A New Testament statement. And the problem with that is that it can get so extreme that it can destabilize your whole society.
Right.
So the proper province of the left is to try to figure out how to stop people from plummeting to zero and either perishing or becoming revolutionary. And it's an issue that really has to be addressed.
So I know everyone has been asking, let's do this. The personality rate, is it assessment test? What is this officially called?
Yeah, it's the Big Five. The test is called the Big Five Aspect Scale. And what it does is that it gives you, and when it reaches its full functionality, what will happen is that you'll get a report about all 5 of your personality dimensions. So that's extroversion, neuroticism or negative emotion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and then the last dimension is openness.
For those who don't know, it is on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree, 5 being strongly agree, and then 3 being neither agree nor disagree. So we're going to go, this is the personality rating task. This is page 1, not gay Jared. You can feel free to chime in. So this is seldom, first description, seldom feel blue. I would probably say strongly disagree.
Okay, so then that would be an indication of high levels of negative emotionality.
Okay, Jared.
Right? And probably either avoidance or withdrawal, but it's not obvious which.
Okay.
I assume it's because of me.
Okay.
preference.
Okay.
But go on.
Jared, that's also a sign of neuroticism. The fact that you assumed it was because of you.
Yes. So we'll need to put Jared on the cup. All right. I'm not interested in other people's problems. I don't think that's true. I would disagree. I'd put a number 2 towards strongly disagree. I think I'm pretty interested in other people's problems.
Okay, so that
Not
means
mine,
that you're reasonably compassionate. That's that marker.
Carry out my plans. Strongly agree.
Yes.
Strongly agree. Okay, carry out my plans.
So I think that's conscientiousness for sure, and I think it might be industriousness.
Okay. Enjoy the beauty of nature.
No.
Really? You know what it is? Camping. I hate the public bathrooms with camping.
I feel like
it's not the nature, it's the bathroom.
Canyon, overrated.
That's orderliness, by the way. That the bathroom hating behavior, that's orderliness, and it's associated with disgust sensitivity.
It's that there was a spider on a toilet seat while I still wasn't finished, and I couldn't get off the toilet seat, and it made me afraid of spiders for the rest of my life at Fish Creek Campground in Ontario.
So that's just cowardice.
That's just cowardice.
Yeah, it's just cowardice.
All right, I'll put that one in neutral. Okay. Am filled with doubts about things. Strongly agree, I would say. Feels others' emotions. I would say strongly agree.
I felt bad for Chink after we sacked his conference.
That's true.
I don't know.
We almost removed it.
I don't know how you did that.
This is a guy who got into aspects of my personal life. Well, I felt bad for the one guy we had to let go, who was reading my emails, remember, and sending out job interviews using my emails and my contacts.
Great.
And I felt
so you've got this great combination of impoliteness that makes you be a comedian and guilt. That's lovely. So you say insulting and reprehensible things, and then you feel bad about it.
Yes, exactly.
What a deal for you.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Follow a schedule. Strongly agree. Know how to captivate people. Again, this show will be the judge of that. Get deeply immersed in music.
You listen to some god-awful music.
So
that's not the same thing. That's lack of taste.
Yeah.
Lack of taste.
Yeah. By the way, this comes from the guy who last week didn't know who the Ramones were. So
I don't think I'm missing much.
I just wish there were a Jared Sucks column in here. None of the above. Avoid imposing my will on others. Probably disagree on that. Probably a number 2. Am not bothered by messy people. Strongly disagree. Not K. Jared. Clean the toilets when you're done. Rarely lose my composure. Strongly disagree. Insult people. Well, does that include what I do for a living?
I would say it does.
Then, yeah, strongly agree. Think quickly.
If it takes you a while to answer that, the answer is no.
I was looking at him because I don't want to judge myself and be like, I would say that's probably one of my better qualities. Hold back my opinions. Strongly disagree.
Yeah, that'd be a no.
I'm afraid of many things. Yes. Agree. Not super strongly agree, but
You're terrified of spiders.
Spiders. Oh my gosh. Well, that goes back to the campground thing. They're the world's
And the cowardice.
They're murderers. It's not cowardice.
Yeah,
It's not
I know,
afraid to be
horrible.
someone who can kill you. Spiders can kill you, and you don't even know they kill you. It's like a microbe.
They want to kill you too.
Yes.
That's the thing people don't know about spiders is that they're always plotting.
Yes, there's a desire. See beauty in things that others might not notice. I think so. All right, this is the.
I'm still employed.
This is the completion. Well, it just says session complete. Thank you for participating. It doesn't give me a score or anything, Doctor.
It sends it to me. Haha.
Oh. Do you
Now,
get
that
it?
won't be the case, by the way. When we launch this, that won't be the case because,
Okay.
well, for obvious reasons. So the system should produce this relatively instantaneously.
Okay, so Dr. Peterson is bringing this up. Drum roll. Oh,
drum roll.
gosh, yeah.
So this is of course when the system won't work because.
It's not working?
Oh no, I'm sure it'll work. I'm not sure. I won't say that, but you know how things are. Is that
Yeah,
when
I
you
do.
do a public test? Yes, it worked.
Okay, what's my score?
on.
What's wrong with me, Doc?
Well, it always works. So I'm going to tell you what you like. Okay.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay, so we'll go with the big 5 first, and then we'll break them down. Okay.
Okay.
So you are at the 98th percentile for neuroticism.
That sounds about right.
So that's the negative emotion. Eh?
Okay.
Okay, and so as I said, that's an independent dimension.
Okay.
And so you're very sensitive to threat and emotional pain. And
This is fantastic to announce to the Twitter mob. Thank you, Doc.
That's primarily manifested in volatility, and so that's the touchiness. And so you're 99th percentile for volatility and 89th percentile for withdrawal. It is a lot of negative emotion, and so that is going to be an ongoing concern in your life. And so whatever you can do to manage stress is going to be helpful. And
that's a big thing. I'm actually going to counseling right now specifically for that, and a big thing for me
it's
too.
useful to know that that's temperamental. You know that's built into you strongly. And negative emotion. First of all, it's also a feminine proclivity, by the way, because women are higher in negative emotion than men. By a substantial degree, and that doesn't appear to be cultural because the biggest differences between men and women in negative emotion are in Scandinavia.
Ah, okay. All right, let's go on down the trail. I guess it's going well.
So it looks strongly biological.
Okay.
Okay, so, and when we talked about breakfast, like eating a big breakfast would be a good idea because your stress responses are volatile enough so that you burn up a lot of excess energy.
It's true.
Right, because you're always in a bit of a state of crisis.
Yeah.
And so that makes you sensitive to threat. There can be some real utility in it. You know, it's like you're a warning bell in some sense, but it can be physiologically very demanding.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And a big thing too, we've been talking actually with my doctor about a big thing is freeing up more time. You know, working 12, 16-hour days on a regular basis. So he's like, that's just not good for you. And everyone on the team has been doing better, and we brought in some new hires. So I can feel, you know, once I'm getting more than 5 hours of sleep per night, less stressed. So, let's continue on down the trail there, though, because this has already gone on.
So you are 43rd percentile for agreeableness, which puts you at about the average level for a man, because women are higher in agreeableness than men.
Okay.
And so agreeableness is, imagine that if you're in a negotiation with someone and you're trying to figure out how much is for you and how much is for them, the agreeable person will make sure that the other person walks away with more. And the disagreeable person will make sure that they walk away with more. And you're pretty much right in the middle of that.
Okay.
And that breaks down into compassion, which is 91st percentile, and politeness, which is 3rd percentile.
So I'm very impolite, but very compassionate.
Yes, exactly.
So I
which is
care
very
about people, but I'm a dick.
Well, it's a complicated personality combination, and the compassionate end of that tilts you towards liberalism.
Which is funny. I think there is some of that for sure. Yeah, I would even like.
And so you're also going to be misunderstood with some degree of regularity because your impoliteness makes you brusque and direct and sometimes harsh, but perhaps also funny because comedians can't be polite.
It's difficult.
Impoliteness is a huge part of being a comedian. But the fact that you're compassionate is also going to mean that you're going to be displeased with yourself if you hurt someone's feelings while you're making fun of them.
Well, we also don't, that's one thing too, if you look at, people have sometimes said, why are you bullying, for example, if we make fun of the big fat whales of BuzzFeed? I'm like, hold on, we're not bullying because they have tens of millions of dollars and they just pump out this content and YouTube features it.
Yeah.
We never try to go after the helpless. That's kind of a rule that we have.
Right,
this also ties into the fact that I've talked to your dad and he said, hey, why did your son send this really mean text to me? He's like, don't respond because he feels really bad about that now.
Right.
Let him wonder.
Yeah, so that's a complicated personality trait to be impolite like that and compassionate.
Okay.
I actually impoliteness is tough because it can rub people the wrong way, that harshness, but it also gets things out in the open, which is really useful.
Right.
So agreeableness is such a strange trait because there's real advantages to being disagreeable and there's real advantages to being agreeable. Like there's problems and solutions at every point on the distribution.
I would say the reason I'm on the middle of that scale based on these questions is it is very dependent upon respect. With someone I respect, I'm almost bowing in reverence and agreeable. With someone who I don't respect, it's almost impossible for me to have an honest conversation.
Yeah, well, that would probably, okay, so let's go to conscientiousness. So you're at the 73rd percentile for conscientiousness.
Okay.
And conscientiousness is the best predictor after IQ of long-term life success.
Okay.
And so, but you are 38th percentile for industriousness and 91st percentile for orderliness. And that's interesting because one of the things that does predict a more conservative temperament is orderliness. And so, although we'll go to openness next because that's the other political predictor.
Well, the orderliness is because I have a tendency to just boom, shotgun blast approach. I didn't get anything done throughout my school years at all.
Right.
I was completely unfocused. And Courtney, actually, who works on the website, is a big component to that, where she was going, okay, write it down. Don't talk to me on the phone. Write this in an email. Put this in a schedule. And I realized that I was able to be so much more productive that way. So a big part of it is because I'm, by nature, disorderly, proactively having already at this point been made aware that that's been a weakness.
Right, so you've disciplined yourself to some degree.
As well as I can, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So extroversion, 82nd percentile.
Okay.
And that breaks down to 93rd percentile assertiveness and 53rd percentile enthusiasm. So there's an element to your character. Don't take this the wrong way because I'm going to qualify it. If you're really high in extroversion and really low in agreeableness, you can be narcissistic, and that gets really bad if you're unconscientious as well. Now, you're high in assertiveness and low in politeness, so it would be easy for people to misread you as arrogant or narcissistic.
Right.
But that's tempered by high compassion and high conscientiousness, and also by high negative emotion. So you're not going to get away with it, right? You're very aware of your own flaws, probably too aware of them. That would be my guess. And you're very compassionate and you're conscientious. So whatever degree of like narcissistic exhibitionism might be part of your character, and like you are an entertainer, so you're out there,
Sure.
Is tempered very much by the conscientiousness and the high levels of negative emotion and the agreeableness.
Okay.
So
is that all the facets, or is there one more?
No, there's one more. Openness to experience. And so that's the creativity dimension. And you're at the 82nd or at the 85th percentile for that. And that breaks down into 78th percentile for intellect. So that's interest in ideas, and 84th percentile for open. Yeah, so you're a weird political animal because you have
a strange animal.
You're right, that's right. You're a strange animal, and because you have some of the personality characteristics of someone who would be attracted to political correctness, and that would be the agreeableness, especially the compassion. You're high in openness, and that tilts you towards liberalism. But you're high in orderliness, and that makes you conservative. And so You have a politically complex person.
How many people would you say you run across would have this kind of these kinds of answers across the spectrum?
Well, high openness and high conscientiousness are relatively rare together.
Okay.
So now I'll give you an overall reading too. So if you add up conscientiousness, reversed neuroticism, so that would be emotional stability, and agreeableness, you get a super dimension called stability. Right. And if you add up extroversion and openness, you get a super dimension called plasticity. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're high in plasticity, so that's extroversion and openness, and you're low in stability. 88th percentile for plasticity and 18th percentile for stability. That's probably why you've picked up the ADHD label.
Right.
Because the extroversion, the openness makes you think laterally, right? So you're all over the place with regards to ideas. Yeah. And the extroversion makes you talkative and impulsive. And so the combination of those two makes you exploratory and impulsive. And then that could be constrained to a substantial degree if you were really high in emotion, in stress tolerance, and which you're low in. That's really why the plasticity scores are low.
Right.
And so you're a lot about going out and exploring. But that it's easy for that to destabilize you. More easy for that to destabilize you than might be optimal.
Okay, that makes sense. You know, and hopefully people. Now, what's the next step then for someone?
Okay, well, so let me tell you a bit about my plans, if I could.
Okay.
So these are.
We don't have a ton of time because this has been fascinating, but we're over time already. So let's. But we'll have you back soon, of course.
Okay. Well, so we're going to release the commercial version of the public version of the Big 5 aspect scale within the next month, and it'll be released in 2 stages. The first stage will be this test, and it will give you a personalized report that tells you your percentiles and what that means, both positive and negative, and also what it means for your political beliefs. Okay, so that's stage 1.
Yeah.
Stage 2 will be, you'll have a website where you can take that, and then your results will be there, but you'll be able to send the URL to another person so they can take a test, and then they'll get the results, and then you'll both get a report if you want that details out your similarities and differences.
Okay.
And so that will tell you where you'll get along with the person and where you'll see things differently.
Wow.
What that might mean and what you might be able to do about it. So we're hoping that people will be able to use this, like husbands and wives will use it, and siblings will use it, and parents and children, and employees and employers, so that, see, because one of the things we don't understand very well from a political perspective is that conservatives and liberals are actually quite different people temperamentally. And so the way they filter the world is different. And so the world presents itself as a set of facts that are different for liberals and conservatives. Yeah. And so it's not just a matter of opinion. It's a matter of fundamental temperamental orientation. And to understand that other people, this is the diversity argument. If you were really making a diversity argument that was real, this is the argument you would make. People are actually different. And you need to understand the differences because there's advantages and disadvantages to all of the differences.
And there's also advantages and disadvantages into how we interact with each other. That's important for people to know.
Well, it's really useful to talk to someone who's different than you because they actually see a different world.
Right.
And if you listen to them, they can give you some insight into that world, and that means that your world can expand.
Sure.
And maybe if you knew that they were actually different, like biologically different, you'd be more inclined to listen to them because you wouldn't think that, I mean, obviously people are arbitrary and ignorant and malevolent at times. Those are separate issues. But apart from all that, they're also very different from one another. And if you listen to someone who's different from you, they'll tell you things you don't know. And that's really helpful.
Right.
Unless you like to not know things and then you run like, face first into walls.
Yes.
Okay, so that's plan number 1. Plan number 2 is we're going to release a version of the self-authoring program for high school students sometime in the early fall. And we're going to help high school students plan who they want to be, define their characters, and plan who they want to be 3 to 6 months into the future. Because it's hard for high school students to think farther out than that.
Yeah.
So that's plan 2. Plan 3 is that we're going to release a website that will enable university and college students to enter a course description along with the professor's name and the discipline and the university. And it will tell them on a scale of 1 to 5 how politically correct, how postmodern and neo-Marxist the course is so that we can help students discriminate between indoctrination and education. And we hope to build a database of universities and disciplines so that we can rank order the disciplines by the degree to which they've become ideologically corrupt.
Wow. So sort of like a Yelp for shitty commies.
Yeah, sort of like that. But the funny thing is if you want to go to university and take postmodern neo-Marxist courses, then you can also use the site for that purpose.
Right. Just like if you want to go to the pizza parlor, they have underground sex slaves in their basement. So this is what Urban Spoon is for. Okay, great. So what's the website for this? Because listen, I will say this sounds like someone who's very compassionate as a professor who's trying. I mean, you don't necessarily benefit from this directly. You are trying to provide tools that really can help students.
Look, we're doing this. Okay, that site, we haven't worked out what the commercial element will be. We want to raise enough money to fund it, you know?
Yeah, sure.
The Big Five Aspect Scale is part of a larger commercial venture that's associated with selfauthoring.com, and the hope there is that we can continue to produce. So, for example, we want to build a variant of the Big Five Aspect Scale that has an IQ test in it so that we can tell you what occupation you would be suited for.
I'll avoid that one.
We can help you figure out where you would be successful.
That's sounding like communist China, where you're born and you have small legs, you gymnast, you have big arms, you work in coal mine.
Yeah, but the difference is that you don't have to do what we suggest.
Right. Yeah, that's the big difference.
That actually turns out to be a big difference.
Yes, it turns out to be a big difference. Okay. Yeah. Selfauthoring.com. I very much appreciate you taking the time.
And I put up a discount for your
listeners. Okay.
And it's going to be Crowder with a small c.
Okay, enter in the word Crowder.
Yep, and so if they go to selfauthoring.com, they can get a 25% discount off what is already a 2-for-1 special. So you can go there and get the whole suite, which helps you write about your past and your present and your future, and you can share it with a family member or someone that you like.
Sure.
You know, assuming
you want to be, yeah. So go and order the suite, enter in Crowder, get 20% off suite.
25%.
25%. And I will say this, I think that to explain to people, if well, you're high in compassion, but you're high in this, I will say this, I truly do believe, first off, I'm answering those questions on air as someone who has to lead a team, but I also do think it's a compulsion to try and be truthful. And I know that sounds virtue signaling, but a good scenario with that would be like, okay, we see this today, and it's this week, men can menstruate too. Now I see it, and right away my first instinct is like, oh gosh, I don't want to make fun, because this is clearly someone who's messed up, a female to male trans, but with the picture of the period blood in the pants, it's like, I don't want to be responsible for this person having suicidal. I don't want to be a bully, but then I go, oh, hold on a second, this is bullshit. It's not true. This is actually lying to all of these other people watching this, and it is doing a tremendous disservice to other people. That's where I always talk about this idea of this victim culture creates actual victims, and so I kind of have to shut off sometimes that empathy because it's misplaced.
What you're wrestling there with, this is a very important observation that you're making. It's because you're wrestling with two different sets of moral principles. And so the ethos that goes along with agreeableness is egalitarian compassion. And there's lots of situations where egalitarian compassion is the right ethic. So within families, for example, it's the right ethic. But then there's a longer term virtue that's conscientiousness, and it's a lot colder because it isn't associated with compassion. It's associated with your realization that things that might feel good in the short term are going to have bad long-term consequences. And that could even include compassion, because you can really do people in with pity.
That's true.
You can really hurt them. And that's the classic Freudian devouring mother who does everything for her children except help them be independent.
I thought Freud just wanted to have sex with his mother. I don't get him. I don't necessarily follow
Carl Jung said if you would have seen Freud's mother, you would have wanted to have sex with her too.
They all sound like disgusting bastards. All right, we have to selfauthoring.com. Dr. Jordan Peterson, I very much appreciate it, and come back soon when you're launching this program commercially for everyone.
Yes, well, we'll let you know, and maybe we can also talk about the high school program at that point, which I hope will be really helpful to young people.
Absolutely. Dr. Jordan Peterson, thank you everyone for this extended version. We must go! Hey, if you like this video, subscribe by clicking the button that says subscribe. If you're not aware of it now, there's no way you're learning the internet at this point. I'm not going to help you. But this was clipped from my daily show, available exclusively to louderwithcrowder.com/mugclub members. If you're student, military, or veteran, enter in that promo code. It's less than $6 a month, and you get daily content. No more clips, plus this hand-etched mug. Oh, when I feel it, I got a chill like on the inside.